literature, both in quantity and quality, for they had given this part of their services in all their meetings a leading place. Among the most noted leading voices were those of mine host, Alonzo D. Dick, Jeremiah Johnson, Orrin Johnson, and Thomas Commuck. So thus we introduced the publication of Indian Melodies in our presentation. Now for some of you, this what I'm about to talk about might be review, certainly to Gabriel, who's an expert. It is likely that Commuck and the Brotherton Christians would have sung in the style of New England singing schools, which was typical in the Northeast during the generation that founded the Brothertown movement. This style is practiced and known today as shape note singing, named after the pedagogical notation style that enables tunes to be taught and learned more easily. In the mid-19th century, soon after the Brotherton Indians left the Northeast for Wisconsin, the New England singing school tradition began to be supplanted by more European and so-called scientific musical aesthetics, as Lowell Mason, Thomas Hastings, and other music education reformers deemed the idiosyncratic harmonic and rhythmic style of shape note singing to be too rustic. However, shape note singing continued west of the Appalachians and in the American South. During folk revivals of the mid and late 20th century, it spread across the country and continues to be practiced today, including by folks that are here with us. As we learned in conversation with the shape note singer and scholar Gabriel Castell, who is also here, Indian Melodies stands out in its time, a shape note tune book created by a single composer half a century after the better remembered New England examples. It is also unique in its musical characteristics. While Commuck wrote the melodies to his songs, the aforementioned Thomas Hastings harmonized Commuck's tunes in the Reformed European style. Thus, his harmonies do not always reflect the idiosyncratic shape note style to which the printed shape notes gesture. Castell thinks it's unlikely that Hastings' harmonizations actually reflect the style of singing of the Brotherton Indians in Commuck's time, although this is impossible to know for certain. So at this point in our presentation, rather than analyze the music further or go into extensive detail about the contents of the tune book, we attempted to connect Commuck's concerns published in his preface to the history of the Brotherton's Christian and singing culture. Commuck candidly writes that his object is to make a little money, whereby he may be enabled by wise and prudent management to provide for the comfortable subsistence of his household. But he also wrote in the preface of his worry that judge prejudice may preside and condemn his, that is Commuck's, work to the deep and silent shades of everlasting oblivion, without even a hearing. Commuck names nearly all of his 120 tunes in Indian Melodies after native individuals, groups, and places, particularly those of tribes nearly extinct. Our host today, Megan, wrote to us the following about Indian Melodies and Brothertown's cultural vitality. Commuck was an Indian, and this identity permeated everything he did and was. He felt the sorrow and trials of our ancestors, and he feared the loss of their memory as he contemplated what seemed to him the extinction of Brothertown in a generation or so. That is the angst he felt, the deep, strong roots of tribal and ancestral love, coupled with the sure knowledge of it all passing into the quietly forgotten. 150 years later, that is the fight Brotherton is still fighting. We fight against the forgetfulness of time, the loss of our culture, the obscurity of our ancestors, and the finality of tribal death. We are an enduring people. So before moving on to the second half of our presentation to the Institute of Sacred Music, we'd love to hear feedback from you all on our argument about what Indian Melodies represents. And if you have any reactions to our historical overview of the Brotherton people from the 18th century to today. So maybe we can move to gallery view if anyone has any comments on that or questions.
How does it feel to be quoted?
You're muted, Megan. might be unavoidable if you're recording. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
I wish my connection was stable on my end. For some reason, my computer keeps jumping off.
Yeah. Sorry, we saw that in Losing Bits.
So I missed all of it.
Oh
no. So I had to leave it to Mark, and then.
I can talk. I got rid of my picture, so now I can talk to you.
Okay.
I have nothing to say. I'm just saying I can talk.
If you wanted to, you could. Huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, how does it feel to be quoted at Yale, Megan?
Interesting.
Go ahead.
The comment was made that the singing school style, later named for the shape note, pedagogical notation, was likely the style of the singers of the Indian singers in the days of the founders of Brothertown. It's not only because the singing schools and that style was prevalent in the area at the time that we can think this. There's stronger, better evidence, and no need to get into all the details of it. But a lot of the letters of Eliezer Wheelock's students and himself, and some knowledge of some particular tune books that were sent as gifts to be used at the school and by some of the missionaries further west. Which Samuel Kirkland, another Wheelock student, a white student of Wheelock's, who worked with the Oneida, lived out in Oneida country for final 40 years of his life plus. He got some of those books that were sent from England as another result of Samson Occam and Nathaniel Whitaker's preaching tour, fundraising tour in England. They didn't only get money, they got like a lot of hymnals and primers and reading books and tune books sent to them. And we've got like specific titles and tunesmiths and some details about singing in three parts and other observers who talk about, they only sang the melody and they call it the tenor or call it the lead, and there's just a lot of clues that sort of put the music style into the camp of what became shape note. The English examples were of kind of the rural West Gallery people, which is kind of the English analogy at the time, and one of the roots of analogy to and a root of what became the American shape note stuff. So just reinforcing the argument in those details.
I'm wondering what we make of the, Chris and I tried to make this connection between, it's hard to understand what Commuck's motivations would have exactly been. He obviously in the preface gives multiple, he says he wants to make a bit of money, and but there's clearly, even in wondering like why he went about publishing the way that he did, his connection to Hastings, his choice to publish this music is interesting. And we were trying to connect it to what else was happening in Brotherton at the time, partially to just make the case for the importance of this music. But I'm wondering if other folks have reactions to that in terms of, I don't know, is that a fair story to try to tell, the one that we tried to tell? Yeah.
Well, I think too, you can never overlook, looking at what's going on in Brotherton, that in his day, of course, is very important.
Right.
But I don't think you could ever overstate the fact that it always comes down to his tribal identity.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so important, and that he saw that that's not just today, and it's not just yesterday, but it's the future he's looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that whole area from 1700s, 1800s to who knows where, all the way beyond. That's part of, a huge part, I'm sure, of why he published what he did, because he wants that to be remembered, and that's why he gave it the names he did. It's all about remembering your tribe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, I guess, maybe combining. Is it working? Am I?
Yes.
We hear you. We hear you.
Yeah, me.
Yep.
I guess maybe if there's any more earlier history about Commuck's work as a musician or composer before this publishing, that could, like, whether it follows in the tradition of the singing school, because I see like the statements about this honoring the tribal history are really profound, and to me, from somebody who's just kind of getting into the historical intricacies of the Commuck story, I am excited as a shape note singer, because I see the ability for that voice to exist for anyone inside of the singing school / shape note hymnal tradition, because almost none of the songs in these hymnals are named for their religious content or their musical history, but instead for some sort of human connection that the composer had at the time of its creation, a geographical connection, familial connection, something. So I see Commuck's work, like this is perhaps a little bit romantic, but I would like to see Commuck's work adopting the shape note tradition as a venue to be able to do that, to honor that Native heritage. So I guess if somebody can speak a little bit more to Commuck's earlier work in composition and music, and whether there was a transition where he moved towards this, or whether this was just precedence at the time because it was the thing that existed in marginal areas of colonial America.
Well, he talks about that in the introduction of his.
Yes.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, he doesn't have, we don't know about his earlier musical history. Is that right?
Yeah, right. Lynn Fisher found his name in the rolls and in attendance records at a school in Rhode Island when he was a youth. But it wasn't teaching music. It was just, learning English literacy. And he didn't attend too much. And man, is he a good writer. I mean, he must have been an incredible smart dude. He got like the full benefit of that schooling in just no time. Really amazing. In his preface to the tune, we don't know of anything else written until Indian Melodies just comes and it appears seemingly out of nowhere, fully formed. It's like Minerva jumping out of Jupiter's forehead, just incredible. But he describes in the preface that himself, he had not even begun the scientific, and he uses that word, which is usually the antithesis of shape note. He says, I didn't begin the study of music in a scientific way myself until just only 10 years ago. And so somehow or another, in self-study through books, it seems, or we don't know of like any particular person that he studied with, but somehow or another, he tried to get himself kind of more credentialed in kind of a white European kind of a way. I mean, this scientific is really the code word for like conservatory European slick harmony voice leading, and it's a really surprising comment compared with what he actually wrote, because it seems different. There were little clues in a couple of his in his footnote to the old Indian hymn, where he mentions that main melody is a tradition of the Narragansett Indians, and that they heard that melody in the air, he says, even before the arrival of the whites in Plymouth, in North America, and that after the whites arrived at Plymouth, they had the same melody, and the Indians heard them singing it when they were in divine service, in worship, and knew it as well as them, and so they joined in singing with it, and they sing it still to this day with the words given here, and he has words with it. And so he's claiming a Narragansett tribal memory of hundreds of years already at the time that he's writing, and that he's Narragansett and came from Rhode Island and was, so he's this is all a sort of just a very single little data point that we can use to infer that he was a part of an active, living oral tradition of music since when he was a little kid in Rhode Island. And then, in the 10 years prior to actually publishing the book, he tried to kind of back up that oral background with a more formal European kind of training. It maybe should be emphasized also that the book was not only published in shape notes. His book at Indian Melodies was published in 2 versions, the standard notation round note version, and then also in shape notes. And the shape note books have a little note on the bottom left corner of the title page saying patent notes. So he has, just the regular version, and he has patent note version, which was a shrewd move to just be available to more different markets. But maybe the Hastings harmonizations and his own scientificness kind of made his stuff less palatable to the real shape note style people, and maybe everything that was of his oral tradition and style and was really kind of like shape note style made it kind of unpalatable to the round note people. And by trying to make everybody happy and serve the multiple markets, instead kind of it made everybody not so enthused, and the book never had a second printing like he hoped. It never hit a really wide audience like some of the other surviving shape note tune books. So this is kind of speculation on my part, some of that thinking, but those are some clues that are out there.
I have a follow-up question. I guess how do I say it? So like I've read rudiments, older rudiments from shape note hymnals that do speak to the scientific. So it's not void. I mean, it's not like the shape note history is not devoid of the mention of science over. I agree with, I think I agree with what you're saying, that like it's not, it's certainly a more, like the people who were singing shape note music would not have thought of it in that way. And a lot of the people that were even composing it were not composing out of a scientific, but some of the early rudiments and in this era, right, were mentioned the concept of science and music combining to create this spiritual communication, etc., whatever. But without going into that, I guess whether it's relevant to talk for a little bit about like the really close timeline of Hastings' involvement and like, what was this, like you got into it just a second, which is what made me want to ask this, is like, was this just a financial decision, a market decision, like who got involved when, and how did that happen, and how is that relevant to how this all kind of plays out now?
You're talking about why Hastings harmonized?
Well, why Hastings was chosen as the harmonizer, or like, I guess what, maybe just some more specifics about the timeline about right around now.
Right around publishing time?
No, right around 18, right around the publishing of the book, like previous to the publishing, right around the work of the book. And like how prevalent Hastings was, and whether this was kind of like Hastings was emerging as a leader and somebody who was obviously like kind of becoming an imposing figure in the community. I don't know. I guess I'd just like to hear a little bit more. Like
Hastings was pretty old already. He was, I think, around 70, plus or minus a few years at that time. So he was older, and he was, toward the end of an illustrious career, way beyond established. And I forget, I'm sorry if I have been remiss in spreading this around some. Liesl, Chris, did I send you guys? I managed just like a month ago, a few weeks ago, to piggyback a performance trip I did in Manhattan with staying over an extra day, and I got to Union Theological Seminary and was able to see a volume of Thomas Hastings' diary that covered the time when he was working on this. And his biographer had a couple of details wrong, quoted from there. It wasn't just, she made it look like it took him a week and a half. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. But he worked on it for like a month and a half or two, and he has many entries in his diary talking about working on Indian melodies today. And he never gets into any detail. We can't tell what he was thinking. We have no clue from it. I was hoping for clues like what he actually got handed and what he really did, and nothing, none of that detail. But he spent a good deal of time for a month and a half or two on it. And he did mention right at the beginning of it, there was no personal connection. He actually grew up in Oneida County, and his family moved there when he was like 12 or 13 or something like that. And he was one of the early students in the Hamilton Oneida Academy, which was mixed white and Indian students in its original years. Something like the Wheelock and Dartmouth idea, and not a coincidence. This is being founded by Samuel Kirkland. It was the prep school that then went on and became today's Hamilton College. It started out as Hamilton Oneida Academy, a kind of a prep school for both Indian and white, and like Dartmouth and Wheelock, it kind of tapered down the Indians and became the white school. And so I had these imaginations in my head of like, Hastings actually, being in class with Indians and forming these relations and hey, I'll do a favor for you someday, and Commuck being a relative and like calling in the favor, and then Hastings. But none of that. No, not true at all. In Hastings' diary, it's just like, wow, what a great surprise. I had no idea that my publisher gave me this job working on Indian melodies, and just landed on me out of nowhere. And what a good thing, because I didn't have much work and I need the money. And he's talking just exactly like Commuck is talking, like, I just need the money, man. I'm just doing this project. Great, That was it. That was it for Hastings, and he seemed grateful for it, and always was kind of happy to have spent time whenever he was spending time working on it. He's like, yay, worked on Indian melodies today. And no connection, no motivation, no reason. It was just a job that kind of landed on him. Interesting.
Does anyone else have thoughts, or shall we move on to the next part? Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of meaning making, so the second part of our presentation to the Institute of Sacred Music was this methodological reflection on both our orientation to the history and story of Indian melodies, but also towards the process of recording and singing from the tune book. And I think an important context to give when talking about that is our experience in the Institute of Sacred Music, if I can briefly speak for me and Chris, which is that there's an emphasis on scholarly approach to sacred music as performers who are preparing to be professional, many of whom are preparing to be professional classical musicians or musicians in some right, and also scholars and some people like myself who are training to be clergy. But we have experienced, I think it's fair to say, there's a certain level of formality and neutral distance expected between people who are studying and the music that they're learning about or speaking about. And I think one could draw that connection. It's a generalization, but one could make that statement about academia more generally, about this assumption of a sort of objective distance between the scholar and the thing that they're studying. So that's a huge generalization that could be very easily complicated, but that just gives a bit of a context of why I referred to our sort of doing and undoing of this process, and the moment of our turning point of realizing we had not been in conversation or in relationship with people, with Brotherton folks or the tribal council appropriately. And so in unpacking that and reflecting on ourselves, there's a layer of self-reflection that we were inviting the community into with us. So part of this was realizing that the nexus that maybe is true of Brotherton Indian history, but that Indian Melodies kind of sits nicely into, is of being both a Christian form and a native form, which is not contradictory at all, but that is something that is an important thing to make a case for, that those two things aren't contradictory, I suppose. And that's something that we sort of encountered from different levels, ourselves having to, in some ways, step back from the sense of like, oh, we recognize this music, we should, like, let's go for it. And then thinking like, oh, this is also part of a Native history and a Native sacred history that we need to approach differently than if this were a hymn book that was like a Lutheran hymn book from my tradition, for instance. So we're going to quote you now, Ingrid, who said, "We came to realize that our singing could not be a preliminary step and should not be an end in itself. That recording music with Christian sentiments written by a Brotherton composer, sung predominantly or wholly by non-native singers, on the ground of a powerful private institution that has yet to formally recognize that it stands on the land of Quinnipiac people, is not a neutral act." So Ingrid really eloquently brought together some of the wrinkles that we came into as students at Yale, where there are also more Native communities present who have a stake in how Native culture is presented and performed. And so we realized we had to reorient ourselves towards Indian melodies, thinking of it both as this Christian cultural form and as a Native cultural form. So another layer to this is thinking about how not only we approach the music, but how the music in a way makes its way to us. So, and how Megan elucidated this a lot in some of our emails as well. But I'm going to quote Anthony Trujillo, who's a Native student at Yale Divinity School, who helped us to reframe from thinking of ourselves as offering something to receiving something, and suggested that we think of songs as, quote, creatures who train us to adopt a posture of confession and conversion as these songs enter our lives. So with this framing, Anthony planted seeds of understanding that sort of grew in the coming months. At an ISM luncheon talk in March, a legal scholar and ethnomusicologist named Trevor Reed gave a presentation suggesting that songs have a life cycle, and that for all, there's a time to be sung, and for some, there's also a time to be forgotten. That's not to say that Indian melodies is that in that category at all, and everyone we've spoken to has said absolutely Indian melodies needs to be sung and to live on. But I think conversation with Trevor Reed helped us to think more broadly about what the sort of institutional impulse to catalog and preserve oftentimes Native cultural forms for the sake of some universal good that's not keeping in mind the history and the place from which those songs come, and the people for whom that music is rooted in their tradition, and there can be a sense of authorship to that song, and that song's life should be centered in that community. So we also read Linda Tuhi Smith in her book Decolonizing Methodologies, who helped us to think even further about a dynamic of academic institutions having often a relationship to knowledge that reifies a colonial dynamic of treating Native knowledges or Native cultures as a neutral object to be held at a distance and examined and analyzed, and that rather one ought to realize that this music, one ought to recognize one's closeness to the object of study, and that it isn't in fact object, but that we're in relationship with everything that we're learning about and learning from. And so thinking about this in terms of the music, we were thinking about how, we're in a two-way relationship with Indian melodies and with Brotherton folks, and trying to decenter ourselves as experts or experts on the music. We were hoping to encourage our peers to realize that we couldn't assume total agency in relationship to sacred traditions, and And we hope to impress upon them that we are formed by the cultures we encounter as much as we give form to those cultures. And ultimately that we were connected to Indian Melodies and the Brotherton Indian Nation, both as people standing on Quinnipiac land at the time of that presentation, and in the interconnectedness of our histories. So the questions at stake in our presentation were not only about how we engaged with Native sacred music, but how we received sacred music from any tradition. And we asked, in conclusion, how might we as scholars and performers recognize how close we are to the sacred music that encounters us, and how do we allow music to move us and move in us so that we can be in relationship with its source. That was a bit of babbling, but I'm wondering if there are any reflections in this from this group about the learning we were sharing in the context of the Institute of Sacred Music, if any of that resonates or not.
Well, I guess I have a question of, like, how has the music affected you personally? Can you give examples, or can you talk in personal terms about taking that approach and what that new approach has meant?
Yeah, we actually, it's funny, we had this question during, at the end of our talk as well. I can't remember who, it might have been a professor that asked the question.
Martin.
Martin?
It was Eric, Mark's husband.
Oh, that's right, okay. Anyway, sorry. So for me, as a person who's, the music that I perform as an organist is very, it belongs very closely in that tradition of that it fits very neatly into the academic tradition. It is heavily and widely studied in the kind of, and also belongs to the so-called, Western European canon, which people might refer to. So for me, it involves thinking critically about what that means and the possible, the various authors and groups that may be excluded from this so-called canon, whether it's women, people of color, or people who have these interesting and valuable identities that don't fit into that kind of academic box making. And I think, Indian Melodies is an example of this. It's not part of what I would perform as an organist, but it's just learning about and then questioning my learning about Indian Melodies has kind of made me want to question how I learn about all of the other music and sorts of things that I study. And I know Liesl's answer's probably somewhere else because she's, I'm a musician, and Liesl is a more of a kind of, she's a practitioner of a different kind of music, so I'll let her answer it as well.
I think for me, Mark, the journey of learning, unlearning, learning, relearning over the course of this semester, also like through relationship with you and with Megan and Kathleen and Caroline, was there's the story of the music and the even the sense of confluence around how many different people were interested and how many conversations we were having around it, let alone just hearing Gabriel's violin renditions of the music. To me, it's been a very spiritual journey, because I feel like I strove to be transparent, I'm thinking about the Brotherton Forward mission because it resonates so much with me. I strove to be transparent and real about what I felt like were the missteps and the steps that we were taking. And I was many times unsure about what was the best way forward in terms of how to approach people and in a genuine desire to learn, and to be open about the real questions that we had. And it was a very, like, at any point when someone, you know, responded with another thoughtful email, another generous offer of information, another generous willingness to participate, it was kind of flooring and rewarding, and also very humbling to just go through this practice again and again of trying to be in genuine learning relationship. And I consider the music as having guided me through that personally. Of course, we haven't sung it yet. You know, that's the crazy thing about this whole thing, is that it's like a presentation about the practice in theory, and it's sort of crazy making. But I felt like a personal relationship to Commuck and to the music, and even just in the small ways that I've heard it so far, because of this desire to understand where he was coming from and what that means, like why that's still important today. And a very like deep desire to bring that reality to our community at the Institute of Sacred Music, for the folks who we knew would be on board with us, and some folks we knew would be resistant to what we had to say too. So I hope that's an answer. I mean, it's not really like a, you know, we were talking about the music moving in us, and you know, we haven't sung it yet. So, but there's a sense of like the story being the leading part, that, and I think the story has, for me, has led me through that experience. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Yeah.
I know there's not been a formal singing, but Liesl, have you sung this? Like, have you sat down and like read the tenor line?
I haven't.
Yeah.
So, any other thoughts or questions, or push back on us?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is just, for the record, I think you did a very, very good job, both of you. And I really appreciated your reaching out to Brotherton and listening. I mean, you weren't just listening, you were listening to what we were saying, what we were feeling. And I think you did a very good job. What did you get on your presentation, by the way? What kind of grade?
We got a solid pass. I mean, it's just pass fail, but we passed. Yeah.
Although I think interestingly, we did get some curiosity, maybe bordering on criticism, from the more kind of musicologist type people, the faculty members of the Institute. So there, you know, one of the kind of controversial maybe aspects of the presentation was that we didn't show them a lot of the score, and we showed one page on the screen for a short time as an example of showing the tune names, the shape notes, just to kind of give people an idea of what this looks like, but not with the idea of you know, really intricately picking it apart. But the criticism, I felt like wasn't quite as like simplistic as we might have expected, which was just like, that was frustrating to me. I wanted to hear more, or I wanted to see more. Some people said they felt if we had shown more and done kind of more analysis, that we would have in fact furthered Commuck's goals. So I think that's a really interesting question that I was thinking about after that. It may be sort of separate from our goal in the presentation of making people think about their impulse, their kind of scholarly impulse, and why they want to analyze something so closely. But I could see in a sort of cousin presentation to this one that wouldn't be actually a bad thing, and we would in fact be you know, demonstrating that. Another thing that came up was you know, was Commuck's use of the sort of synthesis of what he composed as, and his composition with Western musical notation. Is that a kind of radical composition? Like, does it represent a blow against the colonial heritage of Western music? I think that another presentation could really dive into that more. But I still, even after hearing that criticism, I felt like we had the right idea with not showing too much of the music. But certainly, I mean, the faculty, we got a pass, but also we had some food for thought from the comments, both good and bad, mostly good.
Our goal was, yeah, our goal was to really open up conversation about like, what is it that we do here in the Institute of Sacred Music? And I think we definitely met that goal in terms of like, there was a lot of rich reflection happening in the room afterwards and reflected in the faculty comments. And I totally agree with Chris that like, we gave one thing, but like, there's like at least 3 more really rich and important, like information-full things we could have tried to unpack about Indian melodies. And we just chose to be really specific to our community there and thinking about what does our community need to think about. But that work, you know, the analysis and the singing and all that stuff, that's like so important. And now it's like, great, maybe this takes us straight into the third part, which is talking about the recording piece. But does anyone else want to jump in before we do that? Yeah.
Yeah. I was at that presentation, and also just through the process most of the time, most of the way. And I want to really second what Megan said here about the deep listening. It's not common listening. It's really special what you guys do. You have done real well negotiating the many communities and interests and stakes being held, etc. You're kind to the and modest, Liesl, in your description of all the different generosities and suggestions and viewpoints that are being shared with you. Well, also sometimes, and I was one of them, like the complaints and the gripes and like almost near attacks, and despite all of that, it never seemed to it never shook your calm and your continuous open listening, and that's a real strength and ruggedness. It was good. I wonder. So I just think I just wanted to bring up that aspect that it was not at all just learning and happy, generous contributions from people. There was some struggle and turmoil, and I wonder whether for viewers, listeners to this presentation, whether it seems to me you've deliberately made a kind of an omission that I hope to hint at without giving it away, because maybe you don't want to, about just some of what was actually planned and scheduled and then canceled, and just stronger events that were like going on and then turned around, and just some of that saga. I don't know how much that matters. And then so the great listening and the ruggedness in it, that saga, and just a third point back at the presentation. I loved it. You're also kind of toning down modestly, I think, like just how actually kind of in your face transgressive deconstructing of your own department, in a way, the whole thing was. It was like, wow, and so some of this faculty pushed back, and I loved it. The people that wanted to see the music a little longer, and they're like, so they have a chance to kind of like really look at the music, analyze it, right? And the reply given was just, I just loved it. It was like, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to give you the chance to analyze, and we want to ask, like, what is this impulse to analysis? What is this Western scholarly thing that you're doing? We want to exactly ask about that. So no, feel that, see what it tastes like, and don't actually get to chew on anything. Just chew on that. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there, but that was a great moment. And it was a bit tense. That was a stressful and quick thinking and dynamic little situation. So just kudos.
How much of that was clear for you guys, Mark and Megan, or should we rehash it a bit more?
It's not clear to me, but
in the presentation itself, there was one person in particular who insisted. He was like, "Can you put the music back on the screen? This flash of old Indian hymn that we had put up." And the response was, "We're trying to examine the impulse to pick apart the notes on the page." And so we sort of knew that if we did that half the room would immediately zone out and start analyzing the music and coming to conclusions about the music on the page, because it's a room full of extraordinarily scholarly people and also very talented people, and that they would sort of miss this broader point we were trying to make. And also at the same time, I was like, and it's available online. Like, definitely feel free to do that. That's totally available. Good and important work, very important work. And that's not like the main point that we want to, like, we're trying to focus on the history surrounding the music. So that was an interesting tension in the room, which there were people afterwards who came up and were like, "Thank you." and some people afterwards who were like, "That was not the right response," So it's, I mean, we were really trying to open up the dynamic in the room that we were familiar with. Yeah.
I mean, if I can speak very briefly as a musicologist, like, Yale is very conservative when it comes to notes on the page kind of things. Like, there is much more, as a field, musicology is becoming much more open to ideas about music as this living thing and as this community practice and as this, identity forming experience, and is starting to become more open to different ways of understanding that in a scholarly sense. And so I think it's really valuable for so many reasons that you were able to stand there in that room and say, this is a different way of approaching it, which is just as valuable and just as necessary, and arguably more valuable and more necessary right now than the dots on the page kind of thing that people wanted to press on you to do. And I think that one of the things that we had discussed in previous meetings with this community of people who are coming together on this project was that it has the potential to be beneficial to so many different people. Like, hopefully it is beneficial to, Commuck's music and his legacy, and hopefully it is beneficial to Brothertown people who will get to experience this part of their history, and hopefully it's beneficial to the shape note people who will get to participate, and hopefully it is beneficial to you guys who have who learned so much in the process. But also hopefully it is beneficial even to this big powerful institution, which gets to have thoughtful, careful listening people show that there are different ways and better ways of engaging with this really rich, really deep, really complex history and living tradition. So I think it's really great.
You can see how many layers there are to what the presentation became. Yeah. Well, let's keep going and talk about a lot of the people in this on this discussion were part of a discussion that happened in April. That was an attempt, really, I was reflecting back on that conversation. It was April 11th. Amy, is that you on the phone?
It is.
Okay, great.
April 10th.
April 10th, thank you. That was really just an attempt to bring a lot of people around the same table. There wasn't a huge agenda, but there was a lovely kind of natural way that the conversation moved towards thinking about the size and the scope of what this recording could look like. And recently, Ingrid has been doing some marvelous thinking about, from a shape note community perspective, how this recording could take shape. No pun intended. Ingrid, do you want to talk about some of your most immediate ideas as sort of the logistical point person in New Haven?
Sure. So I, a couple of days ago, sent an email to Liesl, to Chris, to Gabriel, and to our fellow Yale colleague, fellow Shape Note singer Ian Quinn, who had been in early discussions with Liesl and Chris and Rihanna some time ago before he shuffled off to India. And I wrote to talk about the kind of consensus that we had come to at our last big meeting about how do we start taking a step towards experiencing this music. And we had obviously had the idea of the big singing, and we had cancelled the idea of the big singing, and we had come to agree that it would be best to have a small recording of the tunes just as an initial step, which could then act as a gift, a giving back to all people who wish to, you know, to know about Commuck's music, and also as an invitation to be part of this with us. And the general consensus had been, well, let's find 10 people and put them in a room and record some of these tunes. And I had, from a Shape Note community point of view, become concerned that the idea of, for example, inviting some people and not inviting other people is really not how this community works. And it's not just inimical to the nature of the community, but for Gabriel and for Ian and me, who will remain part of this community hopefully for another 50 years or so in our lifetimes. The kind of the permeable boundary between Indian melody shape note singing and the other shape note singings we do mean that we have to be mindful of the long-term relationships and the long-term community building, that this has the potential to be a moment of expanding that community and of bringing Commuck into it and of bringing shape note singers into Commuck and things like that, or of building a little wall between them. And I was concerned that by having a small invited recording, we were potentially putting that little wall up. So what I had wondered, because I still completely agree that if we are at some point, and I really hope we are, going to have a big singing with absolutely everybody who could possibly want to be there at some point, that we shouldn't be starting with that. So I had wondered if we could, in a way, undo this very strict dichotomy that we had established between a large public singing on the one hand and a small closed recording on the other hand, and instead think of it as a continuum of singings, where a small singing within a community that isn't itself in a way closed, because, you know, it is a family of participation, and there are people who do and there are people who don't. That a small singing within that little community, just of an afternoon, no external publicity, just some people coming together to sing some of these tunes and to record some of these tunes, with all people welcome, but in practicalities, probably I would say no more than 20 people there, might be a good first step. And that, I think, would be, from my point of view, would be a good first step, because it works within the traditions of the shape note community, but is small enough and quiet enough that it is not, I think, laying kind of public claim to ownership over this music in any way. It's a kind of an invitation to start the singing process. I think it's also, from a practical point of view, it's very easy to organize, and does not take a lot of resources away that we might want to draw on later in the process when we want to send some singers out to Wisconsin, or we want to bring some Brothertown people into New England. We might want to, you know, husband our resources for those later opportunities. I think it also, a really big benefit to it for me is that because the shape note tradition is very participatory, and because the hymn singing tradition that, you know, Commuck's round note publication was, I understand, part of, is very participatory, then it is in a way more true, the kind of singing that would have perhaps originally happened if we have the welcoming in of people who want to be there to sing, rather than saying, we would like you to sing this part, we would like you to sing this part, we would like you to sing this part. So it feels that it's more natural both to the community kind of connections that we want to build as part of this, but also more natural to the music itself. So that is what I was thinking, but I'm very interested in hearing what other people think.
I actually have, if somebody else, I'll try and make it as quick as possible, but when Liesl and I first started talking about this, I think a lot, when I think about shape note music, I think a lot about geography. When I think about it now, or when I think about it historically. I think to me that's something I always go back to. And so immediately when Liesl and I started talking about it, and I'm trying to figure out exactly where Brothertown is, and you know, immediately
Everyone wonders.
right? Yeah, but in my mind, immediately, what do I do as a shape note singer? I started thinking, like, who do I know that's up there, right? Like, who's close? Like, where are the singers there? And so to finally get the thread that I read today or yesterday, I'm not sure, that kind of addressed, I think Jim Page's name came up, as we think about these little, as we think about these little singings that'll come up that'll lead to whatever, hopefully, right, that big thing in which everybody gets to come and sing this music together, to not just think about the recording project, but to think about geographically, how can the Brothertown, how can it, from the inception of this right now, become involved? Well, there's singers up there that could be, if there are people locally in the Midwest that are involved, that are musicians, that are interested in this in any capacity, they can already be practicing these songs, you know. And so like, this is how shape note works geographically. Like, there's a network and people travel amongst the network, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know. I'll stop there. Maybe I made sense.
Well, I think that something that we had discussed, various things that had been discussed were, well, how do we get these things happening? And one of the things that definitely been discussed was, well, should we be trying to encourage singings to be happening up in Wisconsin with the singers who were already there? And that was definitely, you know, a thing that was on the table. But I think the thing that we had kind of started potentially working towards was this idea of, well, how can we record some of these tunes, which is not just about the archival project, is not just about the Indian Papers project, and in a way is not even just about having some of this music that can be given to the Brothertown archive, you know, for those purposes, but also that can serve as an invitation to people to do their own singing, because these tunes haven't been sung much at all in the last 100 years or so. And although there are singers and there are singing communities who are very enthusiastic about new things, and will very happily take a new book and see what they can make of it, there are also singers who feel more comfortable if they know what it sounds like first. And I think the idea of potentially recording some of these tunes was about working with the archival idea and working with the Yale Indian papers and working with the historical archives and collections of the Brothertown people, but also of opening up the music so that people can come to participate in it or can want to participate in it, having an idea of what it sounds like, so that we are, in a way, I suppose, not setting a boundary by those who can read the music and those who can't, but that we can, you know, bring the sound of it to life as part of that invitation of participation for whoever is interested.
Could you provide some clarification of, like you mentioned, a continuum of singing or performances, and are you talking about at a specific location? I mean, are you talking about in Connecticut, or are you talking about a performance there and a singing in Wisconsin, or is this just sort of all being thrown out there to have discussion on?
I mean, I think there is a lot more that we are all discussing, that we're all thinking about. And I think I'd started thinking about this possible first step that we had discussed, which was we had come all the way around from the idea of let's just record some of these tunes back around to let's just record some of these tunes. And from my recollection, the consensus that we had come to in the last big meeting was, let us, in the most expeditious way possible, get some people in a room to sing these things so we can hear what they sound like and so we can let other people hear what they sound like. And it did seem that probably the easiest way to do that would be to get some people together in Connecticut, New York, New England-ish, because there are more of us in that particular part of the country who are affiliated with the project right now. So I think what I had wondered was whether for this first step, and only necessarily for this first step, because I don't know what happens next. I think it's all a very big, very open field, is to be really specific. What I imagined was, let's have a Saturday afternoon somewhere accessible to the singers who we know are already involved in this. And if Seth is in New Haven by then, you know, fabulous. But I think, you know, I was imagining somewhere in Connecticut, probably because we have access to the space on Yale grounds, which I know is something we were concerned about at the beginning, but we can work that out. And we say to the New Haven singers and the Middletown, Connecticut singers and the Western Massachusetts and the New York singers, who are all kind of our local family in a way. We all do a lot of traveling in between. We all see ourselves as part of this same community. And just say, we're going to sing from this book for 3 hours on Saturday afternoon. And you can learn a little bit about Thomas Commuck and about his music. And we're going to record some of these tunes, and it's all very quiet and very casual, and we sing naturally as we would sing, but we also have the flexibility to get a nicer recording of some of the tunes if that seems like a good idea at the time. So I think, to me, the virtue of this small 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon local singing was that it has the flexibility to be both a quote-unquote natural singing, but also to be a deliberate step of recording these tunes and of sharing in this history together. And then to use the recordings of those tunes to send them to the various stakeholders as a way of, I suppose, inviting continued participation and conversation as we work towards whatever the next step is. And hopefully that will mean, I mean, in an ideal universe, maybe that would mean singing everywhere. Maybe that would mean singing in Clinton, New York, and singing in Wisconsin, and singing in Iowa, and singing everywhere. But I don't know what comes next. I think sometimes you have to take a step and see what happens.
Can I jump in quickly and ask Amy? We were talking at the beginning, not sort of facetiously, not really, about your being close by and how much you love to sing. I'm just wondering how this sounds to you as someone who could be there. Is this something that you'd be interested in joining, or are there other Brotherton folks in the area who could join?
I don't know about who all's in the area, but it is something that I would join.
Yay!
And I wonder, you know, is it an opportunity to reach out to some of our parent tribes? So reaching out to Narragansett and Mohegan and Pequot and even I was talking to a friend of mine who's from Aquinnah, and he sings, and when I was telling him about this, he couldn't make the talk tonight, but he was like, "You're kidding me, there's a book?" And I said, "Yes." And you know, he's like, "You know, I didn't even know about it." And I think that there might be an opportunity to include folks from the other Native communities in and around the area.
That would be so wonderful.
I might have a kind of a attempt at sort of a short summary, also like a re-answer to Mark's question about the continuum, and just try to frame this all. I think, Enghad, you're doing a nice job visualizing this sort of an in-between option that you're describing as natural, and I think what you mean by that is just shape note singers getting together and kind of doing the singing the way that they normally do, and that's natural shape note singing, kind of, yeah. But more directly about the continuum, I think the continuum that you've had in mind was like at the one extreme, you know, 10 people in a room, hand-picked, which means also hand-excluded, right? And that, like, you know, so that, like, this is one extreme, very unnatural to the normal, open, egalitarian way of shape note community, and, you know, makes the concerns for how relations with all of them ongoing through years, Lord willing. But then, like, the far other end of the extreme is like the typical natural, you know, traditional shape note singing community model of an all-day sing of a multiple-day convention where it's hundreds of people from 15 states and 3 foreign countries, and the singing goes on for 6-7 hours all day long, and a big dinner on the grounds in the middle, and, you know, terrible travails and turmoils getting a space that's big enough to do all that, and with maybe some kitchen facilities as a nice bonus, and housing everybody traveling and visiting, and that's the other far end of the continuum, right? Just to clarify, what is this continuum and what are the extreme ends of it? And then everything.
Well, that's exactly what I meant.
Sort of a middle option? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I wanted to clarify for myself that. Thanks.
Can I ask a question about the reaching out to other parent tribes? Who, and this is a question for you, Amy, or Megan, or Mark, or what would be the best way to go about doing that? Could Brotherton Forward be in a position to
question? It's hard.
Reaching out, or, I mean, certainly Yale Indian Papers Project has some relationships, but I wonder if it would be, who would be in the, yeah, what do you think?
I'm not sure. I guess it would depend on where it was hosted. and who sort of wanted to be the host of it. If we wanted to do it in New Haven and it be something, you know, that happens on campus and is available then to Yale students to participate in, then I would imagine a sort of university or co-sponsor kind of an invitation type of thing. But if we were looking at maybe having one of the nations around here host it,
on Crow Hill Road with the Mohegan, they got a big room called the Muggs Hole in the middle of their community governance center, and that could work. Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center has a famous auditorium. That wouldn't be as good a space actually for the like singing acoustic or style, but they've got some facilities. Man, the library would actually be great. That library that's like locked and closed because they lost all their staff and
their map room. The old map room, is that what it is?
No, like the gigantic, gorgeous library.
You're kidding.
The research center. It's like the other half of the museum building. Yeah,
it's not open seasonally too then.
Well, no, it's just shut down indefinitely because Foxwoods people had the Mashantucket Pequot had a worse time in recent years.
I saw that.
In mortgage balloons and refinancing the buildings, and they're actually like counting paper clips and like having money troubles. Mohegans are and just a little more consolidated financially. But those options come to mind. It would be just by the location that they are could be very inviting. Just by the location, when news is spread to other natives elsewhere.
Right.
Aquina, you mentioned Aquina, but not maybe everybody connects. It's
it'd be hard to get into the vineyard.
Yeah, that's Martha's Vineyard. That's Aquina Wampanoag. That's Wampanoag.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I don't know. Kathleen Brown Perez is only like 50 minutes up the highway from me, cruising up Connecticut River. And just the Connecticut River corridor plus the concentration of shape note singers around Northampton area, Massachusetts, Western Mass. That's just an inviting option in some ways of thinking, just because of great locations, great concentration of the shape note community singers. Something that happened there would be pretty well guaranteed to just go off well. There's a scattershot of random thoughts on those possibilities.
Yeah, but I think sending out an invitation to folks in the area, if reaching out to the other tribes, I don't think, unless you wanted this to be a formal Brother Town initiative, and we engaged the government in the process too, then that's a little bit different, but not impossible.
Already, in the sense of having been contacted with a request for permission, and Tribal Council of Brothertown actually gave a permission, as I understand, to yes, go ahead, handle Commuck, sing him, record him. Be sure to drop off a copy of the recording with us. Thank you. Right? Is that?
Oh, that's great.
And I also
and maybe
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, and maybe it's the opportunity to ask them if they want to, be part of the hosting. And
I did send an email to Courtney, who cultural director, and Jessica and Jeremy, I asking something along those lines of where we're thinking about how this could go forward, and we're open to how much you would like to collaborate in planning that or being a part of it, and we can think creatively about how we seek funding. For instance, if someone wanted to fly out and be present on that's sort of like the far end, or just sort of be present in the planning of it as well. So I haven't heard back yet, but I'll certainly let folks know if and when I do. But Mark, were you jumping in at one point?
Well, I was going to try and insert that I think it's important that we do something physical in Wisconsin. Now, whether that's having the folks from Yale come, the Shape Note singers from Yale come out for our annual homecoming or our annual picnic, and maybe spend a couple of hours singing just to make a demonstration to tribal members about what shape singing is, and these are Commuck songs, and here is a way that you could participate. I think that's a real central element of this, and it needs to be.
When's the next event that, like, of those events that you just listed? When's the next?
July 15th is the annual picnic.
Yeah, that's too soon, but
Well,
the homecoming is in October.
October 21st.
Okay.
October 21st.
No, I'm going to be in the Midwest for another. Well, I'm going to be here through July for sure, and I've been. I don't know. I mean, it's tough too, because it's not this performance thing, right? So you're showing up as an educational group, like if there were to be a group of singers showing up. But I understand completely how difficult it can be to get people to sing new repertoire in the Shape Note tradition. I've been kind of carrying the colored sacred harp around with me as I've done these workshops that I've been doing in Iowa, and I understand. I mean, in the Midwest, like, we've been trying to introduce the Shenandoah harmony in the Chicago area. I get it, how hard it is to get people to sing new material. However, there's always that small group of people that are really interested in engaging this new stuff. And so if there's any way that I can help from the Midwest before I make it to the East Coast, I'm open to that.
And we have a couple of people. I had sent out an email to about 30 or 40 different Brotherton, and telling them when we had that conversation back in April. And I had 2 people reply to it, and one guy had told me, Greg Wilson, said that a number of years ago he and another member, Darren, had done an example of Shape Note singing at a Brotherton event. So they are at least mildly familiar with it. And then we have another person who's newly gotten into it, Katrina Joyner. She's Brotherton, and she has said about learning Shape Note singing, and she's been to a singing in the St. Louis area. So there are some Brotherton that are already mildly interested, at least, and familiar with it.
Katrina's had some sidebar conversations with me after she was present at the Zoom. I keep calling them Zoomcasts. At the Zoomcast that, like what this is, that I presented a couple months ago, and yeah, I don't know. She might be doing more than just like showing up at Shape Note singing. She's had some interest in like retooling some Commuck, making like printable pages, editions, something. I mean, she's kind of gung ho with it all. I mean, you shouldn't like. Or is she one of the 8 I don't see, or something? Am I talking about someone behind their back and outside the room? I don't know. Sorry, but that's just happening. It's afoot, and there's what can I say? Much ambiguity and chaos, but some possibility that I might myself be in Wisconsin this summer. And I've been targeting kind of picnic time as like a pretty nice, handy arrival for meeting and serendipities, and not with any plan yet, and not trying to like put carts in front of horses or whatever, but just as like a, just in case for possibilities. I do have I do have clearance from Middletown Wesleyan professor who kind of manages the things and the collection of sacred harp books, that I could bring the tote bags of sacred harps along with me, and there might be opportunities or not. I don't know, but just there are some possibilities sprouting in Wisconsin and elsewhere. They're
I'll go to
protein
Wisconsin
connected.
in July and sing. But what's Katrina's last name?
Joiner.
Joiner?
Yeah.
Is there somebody that can offer me that contact information?
What was that?
Is there someone that could offer me that contact information? I've got her name down. I can probably find her.
Yeah, I could send her your information if you want to contact me later.
Okay.
BrothertownCitizen@AOL.com.
Say that one more time, please.
BrothertownCitizen at
Okay.
AOL.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think about what's a appropriate next step to. It sounds like the sizing of the Shape Note community event sounds like it's at as sort of an appropriate goal. It's not like closed, private, not trying to be a huge, widely publicized thing. But the question still is around who of Brotherton and Brotherton parent tribes can come, and who's in a position to do the inviting, which is something that it's a question that's come all the way through this process of trying to figure these questions out. So if it is hosted at Yale University, one thing I think that's important is we have a good relationship with the Dean of the Native American Cultural Center, Dean Kelly Fayard, and we've also met at one point with Ned Blackhawk, who's the head of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts program. And I think those would be really important people to collaborate with in terms of thinking about an event on Yale campus inviting local Native groups. So just because of this broader context of what it means to be, I think those are important people to be in collaboration with. And I think it is important from that perspective for also for a Brotherton sort of endorsement, for lack of a better word, of that invitation. And I don't know, writing to the tribal council is important. Having not heard back, I'm not sure what is a good next step in terms of, I don't know. I actually don't have a next step in mind. I'm just sort of like throwing out some of the things I'm thinking about.
In a certain sense, you already have permission from the council to do the recording project.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to be in the position where you have to go back every week and try and get permission from the council to do the next step in the process. And I wouldn't expect the council, I don't want to say this, but
do some more of that crowdsourcing earlier on. Does that make sense? In case someone wants to like travel or.
I think that it really works either way. I completely agree that it's really important to have people there from Brotherton, if at all possible, because this is their music and their culture and their history. The question of, the two things you can do is you can either say, who is interested in coming to this, and then let's have a doodle poll and try and work out a day that everyone can be there, which is a tremendously slow, frustrating, and often impossible thing to manage, because there will always be people who can't make whatever date. So I would wonder if maybe the first thing we would want to do is to decide where in this general kind of area might be a good place to have it, because maybe we do want to decide that Yale is not the place to go. I liked Gabriel's idea that, up at the Northwest Corridor, if there's a lot of people there, who are native and or shape note singers who might be interested and invested, that's a possibility as well. I do wonder if we figuring out a general place to hold it and figuring out a general idea of what we want it to be will then, I think, potentially indicate some dates that are better than others.
Venues always have their own calendar, and venues would have their available dates, and just, if a place is settled on, then specific dates would just be the only open possibilities, and then you just choose from those, and then who's available is available. It would kind of sort itself out.
Yes. And then you send the invitations out to the people and you hope for the best. And it's not always the ideal solution, but it is the one that potentially works.
Amy?
So does the facility have to have certain recording capabilities?
No.
No.
I wouldn't think so. I would think that we would be able to bring things with us.
Yeah, recording capabilities get carried into the room with people. Yeah.
Yes.
But the facilities have to have like a certain recordability to them, a certain kind of acoustic. No carpet on the floor. Things. It has to be kind of a room that makes Shape Note singers happy.
Yes. Which
Shape Note singers are finicky about those things.
Yes, which it does tend to mean things like, hard surfaces,
movable chairs,
a ceiling that isn't super, super high. We are flexible within a certain range of things, but the recording will be better and the singing will be better, even just for those who are present in the room, if we find a room that is good to sing in.
What about just singing in a place where they host Shape Note singing anyway?
Mm-hmm. That certainly makes life easier.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is, like, I think, kind of more available in a better number and quality up around Northampton, up the Connecticut River ways, Western Mass.
Yeah.
Just seems like they've got venues. I don't know.
I have a question, and I want to be clear that I don't have any strong opinions on this, but it's just something I've been thinking about over the last few comments about location is when we're talking about like concentrations of populations of singers. I don't know much past north of New York about the singing populations. So like, is there anything to be said about a more diverse population, like a more representative population of what is really the diaspora of singers if you go if you start getting further south in New England? Like in New York City, do we have a more diverse population of sacred harp singers than we do, for say, in Massachusetts?
What do you mean by diverse?
Not dedicated, not geographically dedicated to the history of their tradition, like maybe more willing to, I guess I've experienced meeting people from all over the country, right? I mean, like diverse inside, like they're from more places, they're from more sacred harp traditions, modern traditions. I mean, I don't know. Is that an answer?
Are you trying to say, are the people in New England sufficiently open to different Shape Note traditions that they will want to sing from Commuck's